Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone, even if you don't celebrate a holiday. I'm your chilling host, Dom, and we're gonna open up the old horror box and see what gifts we have. Grab some hot chocolate as we first take a look at a horror classic, then learn of Santa's counterpart, Krampus, and lastly get into some scary stories. So, let's start off the episode with the 1974 Canadian slasher film, produced and directed by Bob Clark, starring Olivia Hussey, Keir Dullea, Margot Kidder, Andrea Martin, Lynn Griffin, and John Saxon. That movie is Black Christmas.
A high school girl's been murdered. Mr. Harrison's daughter is missing. And now at the house where she lives, the other girls are getting obscene phone calls.
Yeah, what I've done is I've tapped his phone so that when it rings, it'll ring at the station house, too.
There was a little girl murdered over in the park tonight. Yes, I heard. Your phone's ringing. Hello?
Hey, Mommy. Hey, baby. Baby, all right, Mom.
Hello? Who's there?
I know you're there now, baby. You answer me as good. Mommy. Come here. Where's Agnes? You won't.
What are you doing?
This is Graham. It's group 140, terminal 55.
Remember those idyllic scenes out of your childhood? Crisp winter nights, star bright, sleigh bells, crackling Yule logs, candlelight glistening off of shimmering Christmas trees, chestnuts roasting over open fires, carolers beneath snow-covered window ledges. Remember those. Remember them well. After Black Christmas, they'll never be the same again. Black Christmas, starring Olivia Hussey, Keir Dullea, Margot Kidder, and starring John Saxon as Lieutenant Fuller. If this movie doesn't make your skin crawl, it's on too tight.
An unseen man climbs the exterior of a sorority house, where a Christmas party is being held, and enters the attic. The house phone rings, and Jess Bradford answers to discover it is an obscene phone call from a person who has called before known as the Moaner. Jess calls the other sorority girls, and they listen as the caller rants, moans, and screams in strange voices. The girls are initially startled by the caller, but Barb, an inebriated student, insults the caller. After a moment of bickering, the caller threatens to kill them in a sudden low tone. A younger student, Claire Harrison, suggests that the caller could be a rapist before returning to her bedroom to pack her suitcase. Right when she leaves, Mrs. McHenry, the house mother, arrives and is immediately given a negligee by the girls. As Claire packs her things upstairs, she fails to notice the intruder hiding behind a plastic dress bag. As the party wraps up, the killer carries Claire's body into the attic and places her into a rocking chair by the attic window. The following morning, Claire's father arrives to take her home for Christmas, but she fails to show up. Mrs. McHenry assumes Claire went to the fraternity house for a party and helps Mr. Harrison look for her. Later that day, Jess goes to a conservatory to meet her boyfriend, Peter, and explains to him that she is pregnant and planning to get an abortion. This angers Peter, and he forces her to continue this discussion later that night. In town, Mr. Harrison, Barb, and Phil attempt to report Claire as missing to Sergeant Ash, who doesn't take them serious until Chris Hayden, Claire's boyfriend, barges in angrily later that night and demands something to be done about Claire's disappearance. At the police station, they learn that a high school girl, Janice Quaife, also vanished. After putting a drunken Barb to bed, Mr. Harrison, Chris, Jess, and Phil help search for the missing girl. Meanwhile, the house mother, Mrs. McHenry, discovers Claire's body, and the killer throws a crane hook into her face, hanging and killing her. In the park, the missing girl's disfigured body is found by the police. Jess answers another obscene phone call and decides to file a report with the police, only for Peter to surprise her. He attempts to persuade her into marriage, but she refuses and reaffirms her decision to have an abortion. Peter leaves angrily while Lieutenant Fuller arrives with a telephone lineman to bug the phone. Jess stays up to pick up the phone, but leaves when she hears Barb having an asthma attack. Barb claims that she had a nightmare where she saw a man walk into her room. After calming her down, Jess hears Christmas carolers at the front door and leaves Barb unattended. The killer walks into Barb's room and stabs her to death with a glass unicorn figure. Her cries for help are drowned out by the caroling. Jess experiences another unnerving phone call in which the caller restates her argument with Peter. Lieutenant Fuller calls her to say the attempt to trace the call failed and theorizes that Peter could be responsible, but Jess doubts this. After Jess and Phil are spooked by a couple of search party members, they set out and lock up every door and window in the house. Phil sees Barb's door closed and goes to check in on her, only for her to be killed off screen. Jess gets one final phone call in which the killer alludes to some sort of transgression between two children named Agnes and Billy. The call is long enough to be traced, and Sergeant Nash instructs Jess to leave the house immediately, as the calls are coming from within the house. Concerned for Barb and Phil, she ventures upstairs where she discovers their bodies. Jess sees the killer's eye through a door crack as he slowly begins to close it on her. She slams the door in his face and runs downstairs. Jess flees into the basement and locks it shut as the killer bangs on it. She then hears footsteps walking away and, presumably, the front door opening. However, when she walks downstairs into the basement, Jess sees Peter peek through a window and call her name. He breaks the window and enters the basement, as he calls her name wordly. Once Peter finds her, he begins to approach her as she backs away and clutches the fire poker. The police arrive and hear Jess screaming. They discover her barely conscious in the basement with Peter's bloody body next to her. Believing Peter was the killer, they put Jess to bed, sedate it in her room, and leave her alone in the house with the cops standing outside. The killer's voice is heard from the attic, implying that he is still alive. The still undiscovered bodies of Claire and Mrs. McHenry are seen through the attic window before the house's telephone begins to ring, leaving Jess's fate ambiguous. Alright, so let's get into the stellar cast. Olivia Hussey, who had previously garnered international fame for her role as Juliet in Franco Zeffirelli's, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Romeo and Juliet, signed on to appear in the film after being told by a psychic that she would make a film in Canada that would earn a great deal of money. Clark sought Keir Dullea, sorry, to play the role of Peter based off his performance as Dave Bowman in 2001: A Space Odyssey. The role of Mrs. McHenry was offered to Betty Davis, who declined the part. Margot Kidder was cast in the role of Barb and said she had been attracted to the character because she was wild and out of control and not a conventional leading part. For the role of Claire Harrison, whose murder jumpstarts the film's plot, Toronto native Lynn Griffin was cast after her mother, who was also her casting agent at the time, got an audition. Griffin would later go on to star in Curtains and in the acclaimed television series Wind at My Back. Gilda Radner was offered the role of Phyllis Carlson. She accepted the part, but dropped out 1 month before filming began, owing to Saturday Night Live commitments, and was replaced by Andrea Martin. The role of Lieutenant Fuller was originally given to Edmund O'Brien upon his arrival to the set. However, the producers realized he would be unable to fulfill the duties required of the part due to his failing health, stemming from Alzheimer's disease, which that sucks, dude. So John Saxon, who had read the script prior, was called by the producers, who offered him the role. He accepted and had to arrive in Toronto from New York City within 2 days to begin shooting. For the role of the film's antagonist, Italian-Canadian actor Nick Mancuso was cast as the role of the villain, of the main voice on the phone. When auditioning for the role, director Clark had Mancuso sit on a chair facing away from him so as not to see the actor's face. Clark then had Mancuso experiment with different voices in order to come up with one that was right for the character, with Clark later offering him the part. Now let's get into the production of the movie. Black Christmas was initially developed by Canadian screenwriter Roy Moore, who wrote the screenplay under the title Stop Me. Inspirations for the film came from the urban legend known as The Babysitter and The Man Upstairs, which had become widespread during the 1970s. Moore also claimed to have been inspired by a series of murders that occurred during the holiday season in the Westmount area of Montreal. As noted in an article for The Telegraph, the murders, which occurred in 1943, were perpetrated by a 14-year-old boy who bludgeoned several of his family members to death. Film producers Harvey Sherman and Richard Schouten had Timothy Bond rewrite the script to give it a university setting. Clark, who had felt that the original script was too much of a straightforward slasher film, made several alterations in dialogue, and also incorporated humorous elements into the film, particularly the drunkenness of Barb and Mrs. Mack, who Clark based on his aunt. Clark felt that the college and high school students had not been depicted in any sense of reality in American film, and that he intended to capture the astuteness of young adults. College students, even in 1974, are astute people. They're not fools. It's not all bikinis, beach blankets, and bingo. That's from Bob Clark. Scenes in the film involving POV shots of Billy scaling the house was accomplished through the use of a rig designed by camera operator Burt Dunk, which was attached to Dunk's head as he climbed up the side of the house. Griffith's dead body scene, which was shot with a handheld camera in a real closet, was accomplished in only a couple of takes. According to Griffin, her character's surprise as the killer lunges from the closet was genuine, as the actress later recalled. It was a total shock, because I didn't really know when to expect him to jump out. Shots of Claire's corpse in the rocking chair required the actress to wear an actual plastic bag over her head for extended periods of time. Griffin would also state that the scenes came relatively easy for her. I was actually, and still am, a fairly good swimmer, so I could hold my breath for a long time, and I could also keep my eyes open for a long time without blinking. That was from Griffin herself. Margot Kidder remembered shooting the film as being fun. I really bonded with Andrea Martin, filming in Toronto and Ontario. Olivia Hussey was a bit of an odd one. She was obsessed with the idea of falling in love with Paul McCartney through her psychic. We were a little hard on her for that, for things like that. From Kidder herself. So let's move on to a little bit of trivia for the film. The television premiere had some controversy. The film, under the title Stranger in the House, was set to make its network television premiere on Saturday night, January 28th, 1978, on NBC's weekly Saturday Night at the Movies. 2 weeks prior to its premiere, the Chi Omega sorority house on the campus of Florida State University in Tallahassee was the scene of a double murder in which 2 Chi Omega sisters, asleep in their beds, were bludgeoned to death. The killer then went to a nearby room in the sorority house and violently attacked 2 more sleeping co-eds who survived. The killer was later identified as Ted Bundy, who was executed for this and other homicides on January 24th, 1989. And that's ridiculous. That's crazy. That, like, I mean, I know about Ted Bundy, and I know like the crimes that are the killings that he did, and yeah, I think this is the one where he just already escaped prison, and yeah, and he just went on just a huge rampage and murdered all these girls, and then this was when they caught him again, and that's when they finally executed him, because it's like, dude, you were already in jail looking at like all this time, and then you go and you kill more people, and it's just like, damn, dude, you're just a psychopath at that point. Ridiculous. According to director Bob Clark, the original script for the film featured murder scenes that were more graphic. Clark, however, felt that it would be more effective if the murders were toned down and kept subtle on screen. Writer Roy Moore liked the idea as well, and you can tell that this heavily influenced Halloween, right? So the idea of like having like little to no gore, that heavily influenced that movie, and yeah, I think it works for this really well. It works so well that you don't see like even just like the killings of like the first girl with the plastic bag on her face, like that has no blood or gore at all, and it's more effective that way, I think, like 100%. Like, yeah, seeing someone stabbed and blood coming out, like, yeah, that's gross, but like the meticulousness of wrapping someone's head around with plastic and just like the force that takes is way more gruesome. In 1986, Olivia Hussey met producers for the film Roxanne, since they were interested in casting her for the title role. Roxanne co-star Steve Martin met her and said, "Oh my God, Olivia, you were in one of my all-time favorite films." Thinking it was Romeo and Juliet, Olivia was surprised to find out it was actually Black Christmas. Martin claimed he had seen it around 27 times. And honestly, I can see why he's seen it so many times. It's great. Also, a young Olivia Hussey, ooh. And this movie is just so good. But yeah, that's kind of crazy. Like, I don't think she ended up going on to be in Roxanne, but that's still kind of crazy when, like, you know, like Steve Martin at the time was like a big name, right? So like he's wanting you to be in it. That's kind of crazy. The original title of the film script was "Stop Me." It was director Bob Clark who came up with the title Black Christmas, saying that he liked the irony of something dark occurring during such a festive holiday. The title is also a tongue-in-cheek reference to the Christmas song in 1954 film White Christmas. So you can kind of see it as like a dark shadow to like the wholesome family content that we got in that film back from the 50s, which I think is a pretty good like way to set your film like that. The sorority house scene in the film was not a set construction for the film, but an actual house that had to be rented for the film's production. Some scenes in the script had to be slightly rewritten to accommodate the house's foundation and structure. It still stands to this day as a popular tourist attraction, which is kind of crazy because, I feel like for some things nowadays you just build a whole set so that you can control a lot of things that happen, especially with this many, different work like things going on where you got to hide people in this. But you know what? In the end, it worked out where, like, it has like this attic area has like multiple floors, a basement. So I think it worked out in the end. This is kind of crazy. Warner Brothers initially insisted on a more conclusive ending, but Bob Clark was determined to keep it unclear. That decision's largely like played into like the cult status of this film because it's a film that we really don't understand the killer's motive other than he's a psychopath and wanting to kill people, and then the fact that the wrong person is killed in the end, and then also like we're left with this kind of ambiguous like, wait, he's still in the house, so what does that mean? Is she gonna get away? Does she get away? Is he gonna what? Yeah, like crazy that like little decisions like that like make big impacts over time that I think that most people don't realize in the moment, but it's just it's crazy. And this is very interesting. In order to raise more suspicion for Peter possibly being the killer Billy, Nick Mancuso, who voices Billy, dubbed over 6 of Keir Dullah's lines. Delays, sorry. I know I'm mispronouncing that, but that's just kind of crazy to think about. Like, his voice is in there somewhere randomly. It's just so that you could be like, are you sure it's not that guy? And in the end we find out it's not, but it still throws more suspicion and makes you think like, wait, so is it, are we seeing what's supposed to be said, or is the ending supposed to be interpreted a different way? Was he the killer all along? You really could go any which way with that. Alright, so let's move on to something else, something I like to call the kill counter. For the 1974 film Black Christmas, there were a total of 7 kills, starting off with Claire, who was strangled and suffocated with a plastic bag. Then Mrs. Mack, who got a hook to the face, dragged into the attic and killed. Janice Quaife was killed off screen, and Barb was stabbed about 4 times with a glass unicorn horn. Phil was also killed off screen. Officer Jennings had his throat slit off screen, and Peter was killed off screen by Jess with a fire poker. There is some contention whether or not to count Jess, but I would say probably not, because we don't definitively see whether or not she's killed or not. It's very ambiguous, and I would say that maybe he might have, but I think with them, I think they would have probably come back and searched the house, and he would have been caught or something, or they would have got to her. I think maybe probably before anything happened, or maybe not. See, that's why it's not very ambiguous, and it's kind of crazy for a film that is this iconic and classic, and being like considered one of the forefathers to like the slasher genre. It doesn't have that very many kills, like, at all. And of the kills that we do see, there's not that. I mean, it's not that gory. One, it's not that like. It's they're very inventive, too, for being like one of the first. And it's not just I'm gonna take a knife and stab you. It's like, okay, it's like all these different things, and I think that just kind of really leads to my final thoughts. This was my first time watching this film, and I had heard it was a classic, listed amongst the best slashers of all time. Does the film deserve the hype? Should it be on everyone's best list? The straight and simple answer is hell yeah. I see in this everything that John Carpenter was doing with Halloween, but much simpler, and that is a great thing. The film didn't need to tell us anything about Billy or why he kills, because it's not what we are concerned with in this movie. We care about the women who are trapped with the monster, and they don't even know it. Even having the simple twist of the killer in the house is enough to want to check every closet and closed door. The cinematography is amazing, especially for 1974. The POV shots are perfect, and the static shots around the house when Jess learns that the killer is calling from inside the house are suspense building. The acting is good. Mrs. Mack was hilarious, keeping alcohol hidden around the house. Olivia Hussey, Margot Kidder, and John Saxon all stand out. I'm kicking myself for not having seen this film before. It is a simple film, and I say that as a compliment. It didn't need to do anything more than it did. I love how this is the blueprint for slashers to come. I give this movie 2 huge thumbs up, and will be added to my yearly watch for Christmas. And now we sit by the fire. Sit back and listen to the story of a Christmas figure from Europe. In the central and eastern alpine folklore of Europe, there's a figure that assists St. Nicholas on the night of December 5th. While St. Nicholas is rewarding the well-behaved children with modest gifts such as oranges, dried fruit, walnuts, and chocolate, the badly behaved ones receive punishment with birch rods from the horned Christmas devil known as Krampus. The history of the Krampus figure has been theorized as stretching back to the 6th or 7th century CE, though there were no written sources before the end of the 16th century. Discussing his observations in 1975 while in a small town in Styria, anthropologist John J. Honigman, I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, wrote that the St. Nicholas Festival we are describing incorporates cultural elements widely distributed in Europe, in some cases going back to pre-Christian times. Nicholas himself became popular in Germany around the 11th century. The feast dedicated to this patron of children is only one winter occasion in which the children are the objects of special attention, others being Martinmas, the feast of the Holy Innocents, and New Year's Day. Masked devils, acting boisterously and making nuisances of themselves, are known in Germany since at least the 16th century, while animal masked devils combining dreadful comic antics appeared in medieval church plays. A large literature, much of it by European folklorists, bears on these subjects. Austrians in the community we studied are quite aware of heathen elements being blended with Christian elements in the St. Nicholas customs and in other traditional winter ceremonies. They believe Krampus derives from a pagan supernatural who was assimilated to the Christian devil. The Krampus figures persisted, and by the 17th century, Krampus had been incorporated into Christian winter celebrations by pairing Krampus with St. Nicholas. Krampus appears in many variations. The most common physical characteristics: he is hairy, usually brown or black, and has the cloven hooves and horns of a goat. His long, pointed tongue lolls out, and he has fangs. Thought to symbolize the binding of the devil by the Christian church, Krampus carries chains, which he thrashes for dramatic effect. The chains are sometimes accompanied with bells of various sizes. A more pagan origins is the root, a bundle of birch branches that Krampus carries with, which he occasionally swats children. The root may have had significance in pre-Christian pagan initiation rites. The birch branches are replaced with a whip in some representations. Sometimes Krampus appears with a sack or a bag strapped to his back. This is to cart off evil children for drowning, eating, or transport to hell. Some of the older versions make mention of naughty children being put into the bag and taken away. This quality can be found in other companions of St. Nicholas, such as Zwarte Piet. The Feast of St. Nicholas is celebrated in parts of Europe on December 6th. On the preceding evening of December 5th, Krampus night, or Krampusnacht, the wicked hairy devil appears in the streets, sometimes accompanying St. Nicholas and sometimes on his own. Krampus visits homes and businesses. The saint usually appears in the eastern right vestments of a bishop, and he carries a golden ceremonial staff. Unlike North American versions of Santa Claus, in these celebrations, St. Nicholas concerns himself only with the good children, while Krampus is responsible for the bad. Nicholas dispenses gifts, while Krampus supplies coal and the root. A seasonal play that spread throughout the Alpine regions was known as Nikolausspiel, or the Nicholas Play. Inspired by Paradise Plays, which focused on Adam and Eve's encounter with a tempter, the Nicholas Plays featured competition for the human souls and played on the question of morality. In these Nicholas Plays, St. Nicholas would reward children for scholarly efforts rather than for good. This is the theme that grew in Alpine regions where the Roman Catholic Church had significant influence. In the aftermath of the 1932 election in Austria, the Krampus tradition was prohibited by the Dollfuss regime under the clerical fascist Fatherland's Front and the Christian Social Party. In the 1950s, the government distributed pamphlets titled Krampus is an Evil Man. Towards the end of the century, a popular resurgence of Krampus celebrations occurred and continues today. And now, with multiple movies and TV episodes about Krampus, this assistant to Santa has made his way to the USA. I love the idea of a Christmas devil that punishes the naughty children, and I'd love to go to Europe when they are celebrating the Feast of St. Nicholas. This just adds and makes a lighthearted holiday that much darker. So, have you been good? Have you been bad? Are you going to be visited by Krampus this year or St. Nicholas? So to cap off this episode, we'll get into some allegedly true paranormal stories revolving around Christmas. And this is from Ranker.com. This is a list I just pulled up, and I found and was like, okay, you know what? I think this would be pretty good to tell around this time. I mean, obviously it's revolving around Christmas. And I think this would be a good cap off to this year's Christmas special. So, without further ado, let's get straight into it. So this first story is The Legend of the Mistletoe Bride Haunts England's Bramshill House. The legend of the Mistletoe Bride has been retold for centuries and has taken many forms. While the story's true origin is difficult to determine, many have come to believe its roots are in the disappearance of Lord Lovell's bride at the Bramshill House in Hampshire, England. Allegedly, Lord Lovell was preparing to wed a young woman related to Sir John Cope, the owner of Bramshill House. This was around Christmas time, so mistletoe hung throughout the mansion, inspiring the wedding party to play a game. The young bride-to-be would hide somewhere in the mansion, the groomsmen would all seek her out, and whoever found her first would get to kiss her. So the bride went to hide, and the wedding party sought to find her. However, the minutes turned to hours, and they still could not find her. Eventually, the game turned terribly serious, as no matter where they looked, she remained missing. Not until 50 years later did Lord Lovell, still seeking answer to his bride's disappearance, happen upon a secret closet in an upstairs room of the Bramshill House. Inside, he found a wooden chest sealed shut with a lock. Upon opening the chest, he found the nearly unrecognizable remains of his bride. That's creepy. Like, that reminds me of that scary story to tell in the dark. And that's probably where that comes from. Yeah, I mean, just imagine, like, you're just playing a simple game, and you accidentally lock yourself inside this trunk, and it's in a closet in a house that probably has 50 rooms more. Just that's so scary. Our next story is The Brown Lady of Raynham Hall Wanders the Passages Every Christmas. The Brown Lady of Raynham Hall has perplexed visitors and paranormal investigators for hundreds of years. Back in the 1700s, owner Charles Townsend married a young woman named Dorothy Walpole. While they lived happily together for some time in Raynham Hall, Townsend soon became paranoid that his new wife was being unfaithful to him, eventually driving himself mad with jealousy. He decided to hide Dorothy away in the hall, telling all of their friends and family that she had tragically passed. Dorothy was forced to stay inside the mansion, allowed only to wander through its halls. Not long after, she perished, never having left Raynham Hall after her husband imprisoned her. Ever since her passing, people have witnessed the image of a woman in tattered brown dress wandering through the halls, and some of these reported encounters are truly horrifying. One visitor, unaware of the Brown Lady's legend, approached a woman in the hall, only to have her look at him with a glowing face, but where her eyes should have been, there were only empty sockets. Years later, after numerous other reporting sightings, a photographer from Country Life magazine visited Raynham Hall to document it for an article. After snapping a photograph of the central stairwell, he saw within the image a hazy silhouette that many believe was none other than Dorothy Walpole, the Brown Lady. And what's crazy about that photograph is that still to this day, no one's been able to disprove that it's to prove that it's a fake. No one knows how, if they were to have manipulated the photo or the camera or the footage or the film itself. No one knows how they did that. If it was fake. So yeah, that's still kind of crazy. The picture itself is kind of crazy. It's just a very hazy silhouette, but you can see it there. Moving right along, alleged phantoms plagued a Brooklyn home during Christmas time. A few weeks before Christmas in 1878, Edward F. Smith was at his home in Brooklyn, New York, when the doorbell rang. He answered the door, but there was no one there. This soon became a nightly occurrence. The doorbell would ring, only for Smith to find no one outside, and no signs that anyone had been there at all. Growing frustrated, Smith sprinkled ash and flour along the path to the door, expecting to find footprints left behind, but the substances were undisturbed, and the noises continued. No matter where he and his family stood around the house, the noises remained unidentifiable. Smith and his family were growing more concerned as the doorbell ringing turned to aggressive banging on the doors. Eventually, they contacted the police. The ringing and banging continued, and still no one was able to identify its source. One night, a brick suddenly flew through the window from outside. Even the police officers were standing nearby and saw no one. Although they investigated the home for some time, police were unable to identify the cause of the disturbances. Smith and those who witnessed the strange occurrences ultimately concluded that they must be paranormal in nature. And that's creepy. The fact that, you put this stuff down, and you're like, I'm gonna catch ya. And there's no trace of, anyone being there. And yeah, it's just, the whole thing is just very, very creepy. On to the next story. A slain highwayman supposedly reappears each Christmas Eve. In England, one particularly twisted ghost story harkens back to a tragic event that occurred one Christmas Eve in the late 18th century. According to the legend, there was once a fearsome highwayman known only as Gilbert, who would wander up and down one of the town's main roads. One evening, the night before Christmas, a man and his daughter were traveling in a horse-drawn coach when Gilbert apprehended them. The daughter was able to exit the coach, but before her father could disembark, the horses became startled, and bolted down the road with the man and his coachman in tow. The two men struggled to get the horses back under control so they could get back to find the man's daughter, who had been left behind with Gilbert. However, when they arrived back at the scene, she was nowhere to be found. Instead, they saw Gilbert hunched over on the ground with a dagger in his side. Rumor claims that once the coach took off down the road, Gilbert revealed to the girl that he was the one who took her brother's life some time before. Thrown into a rage by the revelation, she stabbed him and fled the scene. Local legends say that Gilbert was buried by the side of the road, and every Christmas Eve he could be seen wandering the same road, waiting for the coach with the man and his daughter to pass by. Now that's what I call coming back for some revenge, right? But like to do it on Christmas Eve, I mean, I guess that's the time to do it, right? Exactly when you died. But yeah, that's pretty creepy. And lastly, we'll leave you with this. Raucous revelers are said to ring in the season at the Crescent Hotel. The Crescent Hotel is by far one of the most notoriously haunted hotels in the U.S., located along the northern border of Arkansas near the Ozark National Forest. The hotel has been plagued by tragedy and ghost stories since it was first erected in the 1880s. While there are different legends and ghostly sightings associated with almost every square inch of the hotel's estate, one story continues to astonish visitors to this day. Allegedly, one year during Christmas time, visitors came to view the hotel's Christmas tree, only to find that the Christmas tree and all its packages were mysteriously moved to the other side of the room. This could have been a prank staged by the hotel staff or a visitor. However, the occurrence was accompanied by sightings of various phantom spirits dressed in Victorian-era clothing, wandering around aimlessly around the hotel's dining room. Some said that the spirits appeared to be playful, and they moved the gifts and furniture across the room as a joke. This was seemingly confirmed when the hotel staff reportedly returned the next day, only to find that everything was back exactly where it was supposed to be. And yeah, that's kind of creepy that they move things around. It'd be weird, yeah, like one day you come in and then everything's like back after like you made a big deal about like who the hell moved all this stuff around, right? I don't know. They're out there. The ghosts, the ghouls, the goblins. This is that time of year where they're able to come through more often. I think it's starting with late October through the holidays and into like the new year, when you know that's when the most spookiest time of the year comes about. And you know, I mean, besides Halloween, you know, Christmas time too, like with the Legend of Krampus, and we see it with, you know, within like some of our the Christmas carols that we sing, you know, scary ghost stories and stuff like that. Christmas Carol, right? So this idea of telling ghost stories when you're just around together, I think that just kind of brings everybody together, and not just ghost stories, but tales of like paranormal things that are just unexplainable, things that make you want to sit and think and talk and be like, huh, remember that crazy time when, you know, we were walking through the forest and we saw the lights, or we heard the calls, and you know, then, you know, everyone just says, oh yes, I want to hear the story, I want to hear that story, and you just come around and, you know, it's tradition. And yeah, that's pretty much what I think about during the holiday time, especially when my family gets together. Sometimes we start getting into that spooky stories of things that happened in the past. Thank you all for listening to this Christmas special. Another year has come and will be gone. Hopefully you had a satisfactory holiday, whether it was Christmas or not. What I want for Christmas is for you and everyone you know to subscribe to the podcast on any of your favorite podcasting sites. Also, if you have any stories of the strange, mysterious, or unexplained, you can email your stories to horrorboxpodcast@gmail.com. You can also send me a DM on Twitter @horrorboxpod, or Instagram at Horrorbox Podcast. Please follow us on our socials as we'll get updates and news. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a Happy New Year. We'll see you next time and hear what comes out from the Horror Box.